She offered his leftovers and got a life-changing offer. If you enjoyed deeply moving and true stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel now. Make sure to hit the bell icon so that you are the first to receive the next installment. And if this story touched your heart, please like the video and be sure to tell us your favorite moment in the comments below. The evening drizzle deepened as Mayfair's lights shimmered across the pavements. Inside the Windsor Conservatory, a refined restaurant known for its quiet luxury, Henry Carlyle sat alone at his reserved corner table. A half-finished steak rested on a porcelain plate before him, though he'd long stopped paying attention to it. Beyond the tall glass windows, a thin girl stood beneath the awning, wrapped in a coat several winters past its usefulness. Her eyes moved cautiously, observing the untouched food inside with a quiet longing she tried to hide. When Henry's gaze drifted toward the window, their reflections aligned for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, as though she had intruded somewhere she didn't belong. Moments later, she stepped inside. The warmth met her unexpectedly, and she paused a few steps beyond the entrance, close enough to be seen, far enough not to be scolded. A hostess approached, gentle but firm. "Excuse me, love, you can't stand here." The girl spoke before the woman could continue. "I'm sorry, I only wanted to ask if I could have the food he doesn't want." She pointed at Henry. The restaurant quieted, not dramatically, but with a subtle shift of attention. Henry turned, surprised by the soft steadiness in her voice. There was no desperation, just an honesty shaped by circumstances. "How old are you?" he asked. "About 12. I'm not exactly sure." There was something profoundly matter-of-fact about the way she said "not exactly sure," the kind of detail that made Henry pause. He wasn't a man known for impulsive kindness, but something in the girl's tone unsettled his usual detachment. "And your name?" "Emma." The hostess looked to Henry for direction. He raised a hand lightly. "It's all right. Let her speak." Emma glanced once at the plate, then lowered her eyes again. "I only asked because you seemed finished. I can leave if it's wrong." "It isn't wrong," Henry replied. "Sit." Emma hesitated. "I'm not allowed to sit in places like this." "You are tonight." She sat carefully, occupying as little space as possible. When Henry slid the plate towards her, she studied it with a quiet disbelief of someone unused to being offered anything without condition. "I didn't mean to take your dinner," she murmured. "It's yours now." She took small, measured bites, habits formed from scarcity rather than manners. Henry watched her quietly, his expression softening in ways foreign even to himself. "How long have you been managing on your own?" "A while. It's all right. I'm used to it." The simplicity of the answer struck him more sharply than any tearful story could. Outside, the rain pressed harder against the glass. Inside, an unexpected thought began forming in Henry's mind, hesitant at first, then clearer. A girl had asked for leftovers. What he was considering offering her was something far greater. Henry didn't speak for a while. He simply watched Emma eat, with that slow, careful rhythm of someone who never knew when the next meal would come. The rain outside had thickened into a steady curtain, blurring the passing headlights and softening the city's sharpness. Inside, however, Henry's thoughts were turning with unusual clarity. He rested his elbows lightly on the table, fingertips pressed together as he observed the girl before him. There was something about her reserve, the way she avoided taking more than she needed, the way she tried not to be noticed even while sitting directly across from a stranger in one of London's most polished restaurants. Emma finally paused, setting the fork down with a gentleness that didn't match her hunger. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I won't take more. That was enough." "Enough for dinner? But what about tomorrow?" Emma looked at him, startled by the question. "We manage. Me and my little brother. We find what we can. A faint tightening crossed Henry's expression. There's a brother as well? She nodded, shrugging one shoulder, as if he expected him to question her motives or suspect exaggeration. He's younger. I make sure he eats first. Tonight, he'll be waiting. The words weren't emotional, they were simply facts, delivered with the steady composure of someone who'd long learned not to hope too loudly. Henry leaned back, his gaze settling on the rain-washed window for a brief moment. Where are your parents? Emma traced a finger on the edge of the plate, avoiding his eyes. Mum passed away last winter. Dad left long before that. People say he might come back one day, but he won't. The sentence was quiet, but there was a definitive certainty in it, as if she'd rehearsed that truth many times in her own mind. A waiter approached to refill Henry's glass, but he held up a hand. No, thank you. The staff withdrew silently, sensing the shift in the air. Henry lowered his voice. And where do you stay? A shelter? Emma shook her head. They separate us if we go there. My brother is too little. We sleep in an old storeroom behind a laundrette. It's warm enough if we keep the door shut. Warm enough. Henry had lived his life surrounded by excess, and yet here sat a child who measured her nights by warmth rather than comfort. He felt something stir in him, neither pity nor charity, but a recognition of sorts, a sense that fate had made an introduction, not an accident. Emma began to rise from her chair. I should go. He'll be scared if I'm late. Henry stood as well, carefully, as though any sudden movement might make her vanish. Emma, he said. Wait a moment. She hesitated near the edge of the table, hands clasped together, body angled as though ready to slip out the door the moment she sensed rejection. Henry reached into his coat pocket and set a card on the table. Not flashy, not gilded, just a simple ivory rectangle with his name embossed in understated lettering. My office address, and a direct number. Emma didn't touch the card. I don't need money, she said, defensively, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't offer money, Henry replied. He placed the card a little closer to her. I want you to come by tomorrow at 10. Emma's brows lowered slightly. Why? Henry inhaled slowly, choosing his words. Because I believe a child shouldn't be navigating the world like this, and because I may have an opportunity for you. Something more permanent than a plate of leftovers. Emma's fingers hovered near the card but didn't commit to picking it up. You don't know me, she said softly. No, Henry agreed. But I'd like to. For a moment, they simply looked at one another. The girl with her guarded resolve, the man with his quiet, deliberate certainty. Then Henry softened his tone. You came in tonight because you were brave. Come in tomorrow for the same reason. Emma swallowed slowly, her throat tightening almost imperceptibly. I have to think about it. You should, Henry said gently. But don't take too long. She finally picked up the card, holding it the way someone might hold a fragile thing they weren't sure they deserved. Then, without another word, she stepped away from the table and headed toward the door. The rain had eased slightly, leaving a glistening sheen across the pavement. Emma slipped into the night, clutching the card in her fist. Henry remained standing for a long moment after she left, the empty chair opposite him carrying the faint presence of a child whose quiet courage had unsettled the predictable rhythm of his life. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. Tonight had not been an accident.
Henry watched the door long after Emma had gone, the card on the table a small, improbable promise. He was not a man prone to flights of fancy. His days were measured in meetings, balance sheets, and carefully scheduled charity dinners. Yet something in the brief exchange unsettled him in a way that felt less like remorse and more like recognition. He rose slowly, finished the wine he hadn't touched before, and left a discreet tip with the maitre d'. The rain had cleared, leaving the pavements washed and reflective, as if the city itself had been given a fresh surface on which new things might appear. Emma did not sleep well that night. The storeroom behind the laundrette smelled faintly of detergent and damp cardboard, but it was shelter of a kind, with 2 thin mattresses and a patchwork blanket. Her younger brother, Samuel, had been breathing unevenly in the tiny bed beside hers, worry lines on his small brow born from hunger or a bad dream, she wasn't sure which. She had wrapped her own blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling, the card pressed under her pillow as though the paper could keep its promise warm. She thought of the card's embossed letters, of the quiet authority in Henry Carlisle's voice. Her life had taught her that offers could be flimsy things, folded and forgotten. Yet the image of sitting in the warmth of the restaurant, of a gentleman sliding a plate towards her as if it were the most natural act in the world, refused to leave her. Perhaps it was the way he'd said, "Come tomorrow," not with pity, not with a flourish of charity, but with an invitation that implied expectation. That small implication sat differently in her chest. At dawn, she rose before Samuel, arranged the few meager belongings they possessed, and left a note pinned to the mattress. "Back soon. Love you. E." The handwriting jagged where sleepiness and nerves met. She moved through the streets with the briskness of someone who has learned to be unseen. On her way, she avoided the longer route that took her past the council flats, where the night shelters were, knowing how they separated families in the mornings. The laundrette was stirring to life. The owner, Mrs. Patel, gave a curt nod when she passed. Emma returned the nod, her face blank enough that no one asked questions. Henry's office occupied the top floors of a brick and glass building in the city, the kind of place where portraits of stern-looking boards and framed mission statements kept the corridors company. He arrived early, as was his habit, and the office hummed with the muted energy of assistants preparing for the day. His executive assistant, Miss Caldwell, met him at reception with the efficient wave that said she had already managed whatever it was he had not yet decided. "You looked late last night," she observed, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. "Dinner good?" "It was fine," he said, his mind still partly on the girl and the card. "Tell me about the Brighton project later. For now, make sure this afternoon's meeting with the trustees is kept to 20 minutes. "As you wish." Miss Caldwell's face adjusted, as it always did, sharp, practiced, used to sliding between the practical and the improbable. Henry placed his palm on the card he kept in his inner pocket, a different card now, a small reminder he had carried for years, a photograph of a child from an appeal his late wife had once wanted to sponsor. He had, for reasons he had not vocalized to anyone, never followed through. The image had lived in his coat for too long, and Emma's presence that night felt like the kind of coincidence he rarely believed in. He decided he would meet her himself. It troubled him, he admitted privately, to hand such matters over to charity teams or social workers. There was an intimacy to the choice he wanted preserved, an unhurried discretion. He had the resources to create an interim solution. More than that, a curiosity had taken root. He wanted to know the child who could ask for leftovers with such composure. Emma arrived at the address on the card a few minutes before 10. The building's facade bore the subtle gravitas of an old merchant house adapted for modern enterprise. She did not enter immediately. She stood on the pavement and smoothed the front of her coat, wanting to look as composed as possible. When she stepped through the doorway, the reception area smelled faintly of leather and citrus. A receptionist with the pearl necklace looked up and studied her as though she were an unexpected visitor. "Yes?" the receptionist asked politely. Emma Field, she said, offering the name as if it were the last piece of polite currency she could afford. Mr. Carlyle asked me to come. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the card. One moment. Minutes stretched while she waited, her hands curled around the strap of the small bag she carried. Inside were 2 biscuits and a small packet of sugar, her and Samuel's reserve rations. The thought of him waiting at the storeroom tightened her chest, but she had said she would go, and she intended to keep that promise. Miss Caldwell arrived to escort her upstairs. They moved through corridors that seemed designed to absorb sound, and Henry appeared at the end of one of them, silhouetted against the conference room light. He was not what she had expected. A photograph of power can make a person hard, but Henry's face in that morning light was composed and careful, an expression used to restraint and keen observation. "Emma," he said with a simple tilt of the head, the way one might greet a guest. "Thank you for coming." She bobbed a small, awkward curtsy, old manners reappearing in awkward places, and took the chair opposite him. For a moment neither of them spoke, as if both were assembling the right words. Henry said finally, not as an interrogation, but as an invitation to begin. "Tell me about Samuel." Emma inhaled, steadying herself. "He's 7. He likes tractors, and he sleeps better with the light on. He worries about monsters, even though he knows they're not real." Her voice wavered only for a second before she masked it again with pragmatism. Henry listened with an attention that was almost unfamiliar to him, an intimacy that did not demand theatrics, only truth. When she finished, Henry leaned forward. "Will you tell me how you manage the mornings? What keeps him fed? Are you in contact with any family services?" Emma answered with the same straightforwardness she'd used before. Each fact was small, but accumulative, painting a life made of improvisation and small economies of kindness. Henry made notes, not in a clinical way, but to anchor his thought. He spoke then not of charity, but of possibilities, education, a place where Samuel could be safe during school hours, a program that could provide evening meals without splitting them into scavenged portions. He did not offer a definitive plan yet. Instead, he offered steps, small and tangible, to be taken carefully. Emma listened, wary and hopeful in equal measure. When she left that morning, with a small envelope of instructions and a promise of a call, she clutched the paper tighter than the card from the previous night. It felt less like an errand and more like a bridge. As she disappeared into the street, Henry watched her go with a sense of something opening. He could not name it yet. Compassion, perhaps, or a corrective to all the things he had allowed to remain unresolved in his life. Whatever the word, the moment had started a motion he could not now easily halt. Emma walked back toward the laundrette with a steadiness that wasn't entirely natural. Her feet moved quickly, but something in her shoulders had softened, as though the weight she normally carried had shifted slightly, if not disappeared. The envelope Henry had given her felt unusually heavy for its size. She didn't open it on the street. Such things were meant to be examined privately, quietly, away from the world that often misinterpreted blessings as opportunities for intrusion. When she reached the storeroom, Samuel was already up, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand, hair tousled from sleep. "You went out," he said, a mild accusation softened by relief. "I thought someone took you." "No one took me," Emma replied, crouching beside him. "I had to meet someone. A nice man. I'll tell you later." Samuel eyed the envelope suspiciously, as though it might contain something that could change their fragile routine. "Is it money?" "No." Emma opened it carefully. "It's instructions. For school. For help." Samuel blinked at the sheet of paper, unable to decipher its meaning. "Are we going somewhere?" "Not yet," she said, smoothing his hair, "but things might be different." Different was a dangerous word, too large, too unpredictable, but Emma allowed it to slip through because for once, it didn't feel like a lie. Meanwhile, Henry returned to his office with that same sense of something quietly rearranging itself. He handed Miss Caldwell the brief notes from his meeting with Emma. "I'll need a list. Programs for temporary schooling, supervised accommodation that allows siblings to stay together, meals, support, something discreet." "Discreet?" Miss Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Yes," he replied. "I don't want news outlets sniffing around, nor do I want the child treated like a spectacle." She nodded, used to his way of speaking, firm, precise, as though he was always negotiating something significant. "And the girl?" "She'll need proper shoes," Henry said absently, as if only realizing it while speaking, "and a coat that actually fits her. Nothing flashy, something that won't draw attention." Miss Caldwell made a note without comment. It wasn't the first time she'd seen Henry take on matters beyond his usual sphere, though seldom with this level of personal involvement. Later that afternoon, Henry reviewed the list of options she had compiled. Most were impractical, bureaucratic, slow-moving, unfit for a pair of children who could not afford delays. One, however, caught his attention. A private foundation his late wife once funded quietly, specializing in placing vulnerable children with discreet guardians and providing them with schooling until a stable arrangement could be found. It wasn't adoption. It wasn't charity. It was a structured pathway, one that offered dignity, privacy, and security. He tapped the file once decisively. This one. Evening fell, and Emma found herself sitting in a patch of light near the storeroom door, rereading Henry's notes. The day had felt unreal, too polished, too warm, too deliberate. She was wary of promises clothed in kindness. Life had taught her they often evaporated once the giver changed their mind. Yet something about Henry's manner had been different. He hadn't spoken down to her, he hadn't rushed or patronized her circumstances or tried to impress her. He had simply listened. Samuel tugged at her sleeve. "Do we have dinner?" "Yes," Emma said, opening her bag. "2 biscuits and the sugar packet. Tomorrow, maybe something else." She divided the biscuits equally, watching him eat with the usual mix of relief and guilt. "You'll go back to that man?" he asked between bites. "I might," she said, "if he calls." "He will." Emma looked at him, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because you said he was kind," Samuel answered, as though that were proof enough. The next morning, Henry made the call. Emma answered the phone on the second ring, crouched behind the laundrette so that passing customers wouldn't stare. "Emma, it's Henry Carlyle." She straightened. "Yes, sir." "Thank you for coming yesterday. I have an update. A few arrangements can be made, but I'll need you to come in with your brother tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Emma's breath caught for a brief moment. "All right," she said. "We'll be there. And Emma," he added, his tone gentler, "we'll take it one step at a time. Nothing will be done without your agreement." She didn't know why, but that sentence steadied her in a way food seldom did. After the call, Emma folded the phone shut and pressed it to her chest. Samuel looked up at her from the floor. "What did he say?" "Tomorrow," she replied. "Something's starting." Something, indeed, was starting. Quietly, cautiously, but undeniably. Henry spent the remainder of the day preparing. He instructed Miss Caldwell to organize a private driver for the children, a gentlewoman with experience in working with young clients. He set aside a small advance for necessities, clothes, food, school supplies, though he insisted it be provided anonymously. Emma didn't need to feel indebted. She needed stability. By nightfall, the plans were in motion. Emma didn't sleep much, but this time it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was possibility. And possibility, for once, didn't feel like a trick. Morning arrived with a pale, uncertain light, the kind that never fully commits to being bright. Emma had been awake long before the sun, smoothing Samuel's hair, brushing dust off his jumper, and tightening the laces of his worn shoes. She had no new clothes to dress him in, but she made sure he looked cared for, clean-faced, neatly arranged, and loved. Samuel held her hand as they walked toward the meeting point Henry had mentioned. The private car waiting for them was modest, not flashy, with a woman in her 40s stepping out to greet them. She had a calm, open expression, the sort that didn't startle children. "You must be Emma and Samuel," she said gently. "I'm Mrs. Hawthorne. I'll be taking you to Mr. Carlyle's office." Samuel blinked up at her. "Are you safe?" he asked, with the blunt honesty of a child. Mrs. Hawthorne smiled. "Very safe." Emma watched the exchange carefully, assessing the woman with quiet scrutiny. When she offered her hand, Emma hesitated only briefly before taking it. Trust was a rare currency. She wasn't prepared to spend it freely, but she could lend it for a short while. The drive through London was smoother than any journey she had taken before. The buildings grew taller, sleeker, and Samuel pressed his face against the window, tracing the reflections of gliding buses and commuters with a fingertip. "Do rich people live here?" he asked quietly. "Some, and some just work here." When they reached the building, Henry was already waiting in the lobby. He wasn't dressed in sharp formality today. His suit was tailored, yes, but his tie was looser, posture more relaxed. It was an unspoken gesture, an effort to make the children feel less like they were entering an interview and more like they were being welcomed. "Good morning," he said, offering a brief nod. "I'm glad you both came." Samuel stepped partly behind Emma, peeking out at Henry with wide, uncertain eyes. Emma placed a protective hand on her brother's shoulder. "He doesn't talk much when he's nervous," she said. "That's all right," Henry replied. "He can talk when he's ready." He led them upstairs to a warm-looking room, far removed from the corporate environment outside. There were cushions, soft lighting, 2 comfortable chairs, and a small table with crayons and blank paper. Emma noticed the details immediately. She wasn't used to rooms arranged for comfort rather than efficiency. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "Perhaps not, but I wanted you to feel you weren't walking into something clinical." Emma looked around again, still cautious, but the tension in her shoulders eased ever so slightly. A representative from the foundation Henry had chosen arrived soon after. She was soft-spoken, dressed in muted colors, and carried herself with the kind of calm assurance that came from years of working with delicate situations. "I'm Dr. Harrington," she said gently. "I'm here just to talk, nothing more." Samuel was already drawing on the table, an uneven tractor with wheels too large for the frame, and the women exchanged a small, relieved smile. Dr. Harrington began the conversation slowly, asking Emma about their nights, their meals, their routines. There was no judgment, no rush. She asked permission before writing anything down, an act Emma noticed and quietly appreciated. "Do you have any family members nearby?" Dr. Harrington asked. "No," Emma replied, "just each other." Henry observed them quietly from a distance, allowing the conversation to flow without interference. He could see how Emma's eyes shifted, sharp when she was protecting Samuel, soft when she described his habits, guarded when speaking of shelters or separations. After nearly an hour, Dr. Harrington closed her notebook gently. "I believe we can offer you both a temporary residence, not a shelter, something private, a place where you can stay together, safely, while we arrange schooling and more permanent support." Emma's breath caught. "Together?" she asked carefully. "Absolutely together." Samuel looked up from his drawing. "Will there be a bed?" "Yes," Dr. Harrington smiled. 2, in fact. Emma lowered her head for a moment. Not in tears, she didn't cry easily, but in quiet disbelief. Henry cleared his throat gently. "This isn't a final arrangement," he said. "We take one step at a time, but it can start today if you want." Emma looked at Samuel. He nodded instantly. "When can we see it?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a breath. "Now,"
Henry replied. "Mrs. Hawthorne will take you. I'll join you shortly." They rose together, Emma holding Samuel's hand firmly as though afraid the moment might vanish if she loosened her grip. When the doors opened, Samuel tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Is he coming?" "Later," she whispered. Henry watched them leave. The small boy with the worn backpack, the girl with the guarded walk, and the envelope still tucked in her coat pocket. When the doors closed, Henry found himself exhaling slowly. Not out of relief, but out of the recognition that something had shifted again. Helping the children wasn't a favor. It wasn't charity. It felt strangely necessary, as though fate had placed the three of them on the same line and given Henry the first nudge forward. And this time, he wasn't stepping away.
Mrs. Hawthorne drove them through quieter streets now, farther from the clatter of the city and deeper into residential neighborhoods, where the houses stood in neat rows, each with trimmed hedges and iron gates that seemed to whisper of order and safety. Emma noticed Samuel's breathing grow slower, steadier, as he stared out the window with a faint sense of wonder. He wasn't used to seeing houses that stood unbroken, windows glinting cleanly, roofs without missing tiles. He tapped the glass lightly. "Do children live here?" he asked. "Yes, plenty," Mrs. Hawthorne replied. "You'll meet some of them soon enough." Emma cast a quick look towards her brother. He wasn't frightened, just curious. And curiosity, she knew, grew only where a child felt safe. The car finally slowed near a building that stood apart from the others, an old stone townhouse restored with subtle elegance. Not grand, not intimidating, simply dignified, stubbornly warm despite its age. A brass plate beside the door read, "Ashford Residence." Emma felt the name settle in her mind like an unfamiliar rhythm. Inside, the house opened into a broad hallway filled with soft afternoon light. There were shelves with books and a coat rack where children's jackets hung neatly in different colors. A faint smell of lavender drifted from somewhere upstairs. A woman with a gentle smile approached. "You must be Emma and Samuel. I'm Mrs. Grant. I run this home." Samuel stepped closer to Emma's side. "Is this a foster home?" he asked bluntly. Mrs. Grant crouched to his height. "No, love, this is a residence. It's for children who need time and space to settle before more permanent arrangements are made. You're not here to be moved again and again. You're here to catch your breath." Emma watched the woman carefully. The words were warm, but what mattered more was the tone. It didn't carry charity or pity, only reassurance. "Come," Mrs. Grant said. "Let me show you your room." The room was small, but full of quiet comforts. 2 single beds with fresh linens, a window overlooking a patch of garden with winter roses, a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar, and a small bedside lamp already switched on. Samuel walked straight to one of the beds, palms pressing into the mattress. He looked at Emma, astonished. "It's soft." Emma didn't answer immediately. She walked slowly to the wardrobe, tracing her fingers along the polished edge. Every corner felt too intact, too clean, too foreign to their usual world. "Do you like it?" Mrs. Grant asked gently. Emma swallowed. "It's more than I imagined." Mrs. Grant nodded. "You'll stay here for now. No social worker will take one of you somewhere else. This residence keeps siblings together." Those words, "keep siblings together," struck deeper than she expected. She glanced at Samuel, who was now lying sideways on the bed, half afraid he'd wake up somewhere different if he blinked too long. "We also provide meals and a small allowance for personal things, and tomorrow the foundation will arrange school placements nearby." Emma tensed slightly. "School?" Mrs. Grant nodded. "Just a trial period. No pressure." Emma looked at Samuel again. His shoes were still muddy at the edges. His jumper was fraying around the sleeves. He had never sat in a classroom longer than a week at a time. "School is good," he murmured suddenly, surprising both women. "If they have tractors—" Emma couldn't help it. Her lips curved faintly, barely, but enough for Mrs. Grant to notice.
"You'll both do fine," Mrs. Grant said kindly. A knock echoed downstairs. "That must be Mr. Carlyle." Emma's breath paused. Henry entered the hallway with the same calm composure he carried everywhere, but something about his presence felt subtly changed, as though the house itself softened him. When he reached the children's room, he paused in the doorway, letting them take him in before stepping inside. "Is it all right?" he asked gently. Samuel nodded shyly from the bed. "It's soft," he said again, as though that fact alone justified everything. Emma stood straighter, her expression caught somewhere between gratitude and caution. "It's a lot to take in," she said quietly. "I understand. Nothing needs to be decided today. This is simply your space to rest. The foundation will handle meals, clothing, schooling. I'll oversee things from a distance." Emma glanced up sharply. "Why?" It wasn't a challenge, just a genuine question from someone who had learned that kindness often came with strings. Henry thought for a moment before answering. "Because someone should have helped sooner. And because you walked into that restaurant with more dignity than most adults I've met." Emma looked down. She didn't know how to hold compliments like that. They slipped through her fingers too easily. "But remember," Henry added, voice softer, "you choose every step. Nothing happens without your agreement." Samuel sat up suddenly. "Is Emma in charge?" Henry smiled faintly. "Yes, very much so." Something eased in Emma's shoulders, barely visible, but real. As Henry left the room with Mrs. Grant, Emma watched him go. She didn't know yet whether to trust these changes or whether the ground beneath them was temporary. But for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the night coming, and Samuel wasn't afraid of sleeping. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a door opening from the inside. The first night in Ashford residence passed with a quiet that Emma had almost forgotten existed. No shuffling footsteps from neighboring rooms, no echo of machinery from the laundrette, no sudden knocks or hurried whispers. Just the soft, steady hum of the radiator and Samuel's rhythmic breathing in the bed beside hers. She woke before him, startled not by noise, but by the absence of it. For a moment she lay still, unsure whether she had dreamt the entire previous day. But there was the neatly folded blanket at the foot of her bed, the soft glow of the bedside lamp still warm from their late arrival, and the faint scent of lavender from the corridor. It was real, and that realness unsettled her in a way that hunger never had. Samuel stirred moments later, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Em? Did we stay?" he whispered. "We did, and we're still here." He let out a small sigh, the kind that children only release when they feel entirely safe. Downstairs, breakfast waited. Porridge with honey, warm toast, sliced fruit arranged in bowls. Mrs. Grant moved about with calm familiarity, ensuring each child had what they needed. There were 3 other children at the long wooden table, older than Samuel, younger than Emma, each carrying their own quiet pasts that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Emma hesitated before sitting. She had always eaten quickly and quietly, ready to move on before anyone noticed. But here, the pace was slower, measured. No one grabbed, no one guarded their plate as if it could be taken. She watched Samuel take a spoonful of porridge, eyes widening. "It's warm." "It's meant to be," Emma replied, though her own voice trembled slightly. They ate in silence, and for the first time in a long while, the silence felt like safety, not emptiness. Later in the morning, Mrs. Hawthorne arrived with a small set of bags, new clothes, toiletries, and simple essentials, chosen with care rather than show. She handed them to Emma. "These are for you both. Nothing extravagant, just what you'll need for now." Emma took the bags gingerly, as though they might break in her hands.
You didn't have to. We did, Mrs. Hawthorne interrupted gently. Every child here receives the same start. The fairness of it steadied Emma more than the belongings themselves. Shortly after, a soft knock sounded at the front door. Mrs. Grant opened it to reveal Henry Carlyle, standing neatly as always, but with a faint weariness beneath his eyes, perhaps from the weight of decisions or perhaps from caring more than he intended. Samuel's face brightened instantly. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," Henry replied. Emma stood a little behind her brother, hesitant. "You don't have to visit," she said quietly. "I know, but I'd like to check in just to see how the two of you are adjusting." Mrs. Grant invited him to the sitting room while the children finished their morning things. The room had warm wooden floors, a fireplace trimmed with tile, and shelves lined with books donated over the years. It didn't have the stiffness of a charity office. Its warmth came from real use, not decoration. "You did well choosing this place," Mrs. Grant said softly. "It wasn't done lightly," Henry replied. Emma entered the room with Samuel close behind, both freshly changed into new clothes that fit properly. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Clean sleeves, secure buttons, and shoes that didn't scrape the floor. Henry noticed, though he said nothing. "Dr. Harrington will come by tomorrow. She'll speak to both of you about school options and the next steps. Nothing will be rushed." Samuel tugged on Emma's jumper. "Will school have tractors?" Emma sighed softly. "You and your tractors." Henry smiled. "Perhaps not in the classroom, but you might see them on school trips." Samuel considered this and nodded, seemingly satisfied. Henry turned to Emma. "If there's anything you need, you can tell Mrs. Grant. She'll inform me quietly." Emma nodded. "Thank you." But Henry caught the flicker in her eyes, the question she didn't ask. "Why are you doing this?" she finally said, her voice calm but direct. Henry paused, hands clasped lightly. "Because sometimes life puts certain people in our path, and ignoring that would feel like walking away from something important." Emma looked down. She wasn't used to being placed in the category of important. Samuel, however, had his own view. "Is Emma important because she asked for food?" Henry shook his head. "No, she's important because she didn't ask for anything else." Emma felt a quiet warmth build in her chest, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Mrs. Grant stood. "There's something else you should all see." She led them to a small study room with a wooden desk and a window overlooking the garden. "This will be your space for homework and for any meetings with Dr. Harrington." Samuel touched the desk's surface lightly. "Do we have to do homework?" "Yes," Emma replied firmly. "Good," he said, surprising her again. Emma traced the edge of the desk with her fingertips. "You've done too much," she murmured. "And you've had far too little," Mrs. Grant replied gently. For the first time since arriving, Emma allowed herself a small breath of belief. As Henry prepared to leave, Samuel waved at him eagerly. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Not tomorrow," Henry said honestly, "but soon." He looked at Emma, steady, respectful. "You can take your time trusting this place," he said softly. "No decision is being made without you." When he left, Emma stood watching the door long after it closed, not out of fear, not out of uncertainty, but because, for the first time in years, someone had left and she did not feel abandoned. Something was building, not loudly, not suddenly, but like a foundation forming beneath her feet. And she wasn't standing on broken ground anymore.
Over the next 2 days, Ashford residents settled into a new rhythm around Emma and Samuel. Children were naturally observant, and the other 3 residents adjusted to their presence without fuss: an extra seat at the dining table, an added pair of shoes near the entrance, an occasional shared smile across the hallway. Samuel adapted quickly. He liked the warm floors, the steady meals, the colored pencils in the study room. He liked Mrs. Grant's soft humming in the evenings and the way the corridors didn't echo with uncertainty. But most of all, he liked that Emma wasn't leaving him behind anymore, not even for a minute. Emma, however, carried her caution like a second skin. She helped with chores instinctively, folding laundry that wasn't hers, wiping crumbs from the table even before she'd finished eating. Mrs. Grant noticed and gently corrected her. "You're not here to work," she said softly. "You're here to live." Emma nodded, but the habit of earning her place was hard to put down. On the 3rd morning, Dr. Harrington arrived as promised. She sat across from Emma and Samuel in the study room, light streaming softly through the window, winter roses swaying outside. "Before we talk about school," Dr. Harrington began, "I want to ask how you're feeling here. Safe? Comfortable?" Samuel nodded immediately. Emma hesitated. "It's kind," she said finally. "Everyone is kind. I'm just not used to it." "That's all right," Dr. Harrington said gently. "Kindness can feel unfamiliar when life has asked too much of you." She turned a page in her notebook. "I've spoken with Mr. Carlyle. We've identified a school nearby that offers a good settling-in program. Small classes, supportive teachers, no pressure. You can try it first, no obligation to continue if you feel overwhelmed." Emma stiffened slightly. "And Samuel stays with me?" "Always," Dr. Harrington said gently. "He'll attend the lower year group. You'll arrive and leave together." Emma's shoulders softened by a fraction. The rest of the morning passed with practical discussions: uniform sizes, lunch cards, bus routes. Samuel was fascinated by the idea of school breakfasts and asked 3 times whether tractors might appear in any of the books. When the meeting ended, Emma stood by the window looking out at the modest garden. The roses were beginning to wilt under the persistent cold, their petals curled inward, but still hanging on. "You're quiet," Dr. Harrington observed. Emma nodded. "I'm thinking." "About what?" Emma traced the window frame. "About things lasting or not lasting." Dr. Harrington paused a moment. "Do you think this won't last?" Emma shrugged with careful neutrality. "Good things usually don't stay." The doctor waited a moment before responding. "Sometimes they do, and sometimes they stay because someone made sure they would." Emma didn't reply, but her eyes flicked briefly to the door, as though wondering if Henry's presence was still somewhere beyond it. Henry arrived later that afternoon, unannounced but not unexpected. He had a way of entering spaces quietly, as though aware of the delicate balance they held. Mrs. Grant greeted him with a nod. "They're in the sitting room, talking about school." Henry stepped inside to find Emma showing Samuel how to zip his new coat properly. The boy was fidgeting, half excited, half nervous. Emma looked up when she sensed Henry. "You came," she said. "I did. How was the meeting?" "Good," Samuel answered before Emma could speak. "There's breakfast and books." "And school trips," Emma added softly. "Tractors?" Henry asked. "Not yet," Samuel said mournfully. "We'll keep looking," Henry assured him. They all moved into the small sitting room, where the fire crackled faintly. Henry noticed the shift in Emma's posture, still guarded, still assessing him, but less rigid than before. "Are you comfortable here?" he asked her. "Yes," she said honestly. "It feels Different. Different good? Different confusing, she corrected. Not it. Confusing is allowed. You've had to be responsible for more than most adults. Adjusting doesn't happen overnight. She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to voice something she'd held back. You won't let them move us somewhere else, suddenly, without telling me? Henry's expression tightened, not with irritation, but with something closer to regret. No, he said, not ever without your consent. Emma let out a breath she hadn't meant to release. It sounded almost like relief. Henry tugged at Henry's sleeve. Will you come to our school? He smiled. If Emma agrees. Emma froze slightly, startled by the transfer of authority. She glanced between Henry and Samuel, and for the first time, she didn't say no. I'll think about it. Henry nodded. That's all I ask. That evening, after Henry left, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, looking at the wardrobe, the soft lamp, and the neatly placed shoes Samuel had tucked under his bed. Samuel climbed into his blanket, whispering into the dimness. Em, do you think he'll stay? Emma didn't answer immediately. She looked at the door Henry had left through earlier, the same door she hadn't wanted to watch for fear of missing something. Then she lay down beside Samuel, pulling the blanket gently over him. I don't know, she said quietly, but it feels like something is trying to stay. Samuel nodded sleepily. Feels warm. Emma didn't say it out loud, but for once, she felt it too.
Morning crept into Ashford residence with a gentleness that seemed almost intentional. The lamps in the corridor was still glowing faintly when Emma woke, her mind already alert. Today wasn't just another day indoors. Today was school. A trial day, Dr. Harrington had called it. A beginning, Henry had said. Emma wasn't sure what to call it yet. Samuel sat up, rubbing his eyes. Do we have to go? He asked, not with dislike, but with the apprehension of stepping into the unfamiliar. Emma tucked in the corner of his shirt with practiced fingers. We promised we'd try, she said. Just trying, nothing more. Downstairs, Mrs. Grant was already preparing lunch packs, neat brown bags with fruit, sandwiches, and a little note clipped inside. Samuel peeked inside his bag. What's this? It's a message, Mrs. Grant smiled. Something to read at lunchtime. Samuel squinted. But I can't read it. You will, Emma said gently. Soon. A soft knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped in with her warm, steady smile. Ready for the journey? Samuel nodded, gripping his bag tightly. Emma hesitated, scanning the hallway as though expecting someone. You're looking for Mr. Carlyle? Mrs. Grant asked quietly. Emma blinked, caught off guard. No, I just thought... He sent a message, Mrs. Grant said. Meetings all morning, but he said to wish you both a good start. Emma looked down. She wasn't disappointed, she told herself, just unsettled, as though something she hadn't asked for had quietly mattered more than she realized. The school was smaller than she expected, red-bricked with neat hedges and a playground painted with chalked hopscotch marks. Children moved about in clusters, chattering, running, living without caution. Samuel held Emma's hand more tightly than usual. Inside, a gentle-faced teacher named Mrs. Turner welcomed them. We'll take things slowly, she assured Emma. No pressure, no expectations beyond comfort. Samuel was taken to his classroom first. He paused at the doorway, staring at the shelves filled with books and toy models. Do you have tractors? He asked hopefully. Mrs. Turner laughed softly. We do, actually, just on the second shelf. Samuel turned to Emma. It's safe, he whispered. She nodded. I'll be right nearby. When he disappeared inside, Emma found herself standing unusually still. It had been years since she'd been in a school long enough to remember the feel of desks and pencils and the muted rustle of uniforms. A teacher approached her. Emma Field, your class is just down this corridor. Emma followed, each step strangely heavy. She wasn't afraid of lessons or rules. It was the unfamiliar stability that unsettled her most. School passed in a blur. Not overwhelming, just different. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and warm radiators. The teachers spoke gently, classmates offered small smiles, and when Emma answered questions with quiet precision, a few children looked impressed rather than suspicious. At lunch, Emma sat on a bench with Samuel, who was proudly showing her the lunch note he couldn't read. "It says," Emma began softly, reading it aloud, "you are exactly where you should be." Samuel grinned, biting into his sandwich like it was a feast. Emma folded the note carefully, placing it back inside his bag as though it were something precious. When school ended, Mrs. Hawthorne was waiting outside. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I thought," Emma said. "Better than she'll admit," Samuel added. They both climbed into the car, Emma quieter now, lost in thought. As they approached Ashford residence, a familiar figure stood just outside the gate. Henry. He wasn't wearing his usual suit, just a wool coat and scarf, as though he'd slipped away between meetings. When Samuel spotted him, he nearly pressed his face flat against the window. "He did come!" he exclaimed. Emma felt something stir, something small but sincere. The car stopped. Henry stepped forward. "How was the first day?" he asked, looking directly at Emma. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know, but I wanted to hear it from you." Emma hesitated. Words were never the easiest currency for her. "It was fine," she said. Samuel tugged her sleeve. "Tell him the note." Emma glared gently at Samuel, but he insisted. Henry raised an eyebrow. "What note?" Emma sighed. "Mrs. Brandt left one in Samuel's lunch bag." She paused. It said, "You are exactly where you should be." Henry nodded slowly, something thoughtful settling in his expression. "Do you believe that?" he asked. Emma looked at Samuel, at the residence behind them, at the street where fear didn't lurk anymore. "I don't know yet," she admitted softly, "but today felt like a start." Henry didn't smile, but the warmth in his eyes deepened. "That's all a beginning needs to be," he said. The children walked indoors, and Henry remained outside for a moment longer, watching them disappear into the lighted hallway. He hadn't planned to care this deeply, but life had a way of shifting people without asking permission, and Emma, careful, cautious, quietly brave, had already shifted something in him. More than he expected, more than he could yet admit.
The days that followed settled into a quiet but promising rhythm. Samuel woke each morning with the excited certainty of a child who finally knew what the day would bring. Emma, though steadier now, still moved with that gentle caution of someone waiting for the ground beneath her feet to shift again. Yet each day at Ashford residence proved her wrong in the best possible ways. School grew easier. Samuel discovered not one, but 3 tractor books in the reading corner. Emma found herself answering questions confidently, sometimes even smiling when classmates invited her into conversations she wasn't used to having. The teachers praised her focus. She accepted the compliments with the same restraint she applied to everything in her life. But something else was changing too. Quietly, almost invisibly, Emma was beginning to trust. She didn't announce it, she didn't even fully admit it, but she felt it. In the way she lingered a little longer at the breakfast table. In the way she no longer checked the door twice at night. In the way she no longer watched Samuel sleep with fear of losing him. And each afternoon, Henry visited, when he could, never forcing, never overstepping. Sometimes he stayed 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. Sometimes he simply listened to Samuel excitedly recount a tractor fact he'd learned. One afternoon, he found Emma alone in the study room, copying notes from a book. She looked up when she sensed him, but didn't close the notebook as she might have before. "Homework?" he asked. "Revision," she corrected. He nodded approvingly. "I saw Dr. Harrington earlier. She's impressed with how quickly you're settling in." Emma shrugged slightly. "She's kind." "You deserve kind," Henry replied. Emma's pen paused. The words were simple, but they held a weight she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Henry stepped closer, placing a folder on the table. "I've arranged something. Only if you want it." Emma looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. "What is it?" He sat carefully across from her. "This residence, it's meant for temporary placements. A few months, sometimes less." She stiffened immediately. Henry raised a gentle hand. "That isn't bad news. Quite the opposite." He slid the folder slightly closer. "This is an application for a long-term guardianship program through the foundation my late wife supported. It allows children like you and Samuel to stay in a stable home for as long as they need, years if necessary. No separation, no unexpected moves, just permanence." Emma stared at him, breath caught halfway. "Long-term here?" "If you choose," Henry said. "Ashford Residence isn't just a stopover. It can become your home for as long as you want it to be." Emma's voice dropped. "And you?" "I would remain involved," Henry replied quietly. "Not as a parent, unless that's ever something you want later in life, but as someone responsible for ensuring your stability, your education, your future." Emma's eyes lowered. "This feels too big." "Life-changing offers usually are," Henry said softly. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of possibility. At that moment, Samuel burst into the room waving a small certificate. "I got a reading star!" Emma looked at him with a softness she rarely showed openly. "That's brilliant," she said, pulling him close. Henry watched them, this small, unexpectedly resilient pair, and something settled in him too. Something calm, something certain. Emma held Samuel for a moment, then looked up at Henry. "If we say yes," she said carefully, "what happens next?" "We take it one step at a time. We complete the paperwork, we secure your place here, and we build your future together, steadily, safely, with your consent at every stage." "And you won't leave?" "No," Henry said firmly. "Not unless you want me to." Emma exchanged a glance with Samuel. His small hand slipped into hers, confident and trusting. She inhaled slowly. "Then, yes," she whispered. A single word. Quiet, careful, but enough to alter the course of all their lives. Henry didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, respectfully, gratefully. "This," he said softly, "is the beginning."
If you enjoyed this entire story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell icon so that all future stories reach you immediately. Like the video and let us know in the comments what was your favorite moment of this story.